Truth is, I thought it mattered. I thought that
money
mattered. But does it bollocks? Not compared to how people matter.
Welcome, Mention, and other fine folks, to the Someday Dispatch of the Black Letter, where we contemplate thoughts worth thinking as we try to create better lives for ourselves, come out through the topsy-turvy, upside-down world we find ourselves into greener pastures where we're wealthier, wiser, and healthier. Got a bunch on the go today. We're talking about the economy generally, where things are at, as a bit of election news, as you can see here, and we're going to take a look at cryptocurrency and why it might head to $1 million within around the next 5-10 years. So says Raoul Pal. So interesting thoughts. Let's get to it. U.S. intelligence report on Trump-Biden election meddling reveals who Russia, China, and Iran want to win. Of course, on the bottom here, you can see, you can imagine who wants who to win, but I thought this was interesting anyway, if you have some thoughts and guesses before we carry on. So Russia is trying to undermine presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden's candidacy, a leading U.S. intelligence official said Friday. On the other side of the coin, China and Iran want President Donald Trump to lose the election, said William Evanina, director of the National Counterintelligence and Security Center. Evanina warned that foreign states will continue to use covert and overt influence measures to affect the presidential election. This shouldn't be a surprise. I guess perhaps it evens them out. Got Russia on the one hand trying to upset the apple cart in Trump's favor, and then we have China and Iran trying to upset the apple cart in Biden's favor. Interesting. While many foreign actors have views on who should hold the White House, we are primarily concerned about the ongoing and potential activity by China, Russia, and Iran, Ivanina said. And of course, that's not to be unexpected. Many of the other countries are perhaps smaller actors and have less tech hacking capabilities, perhaps, to interfere with elections. So those are the big players. Of course, those are the ones that also have the most to win or lose, potentially, depending on who gets into the White House next. Evanina's statement said that China wants Trump to lose in part because Beijing sees him as unpredictable. I think most of the world sees Trump as unpredictable. He isn't reliable that way, certainly. On Russia, U.S. intelligence assess that the Kremlin is using a range of measures to primarily denigrate former Vice President Biden and what it sees as an anti-Russia establishment. Russian officials are spreading claims about corruption to try to undermine Biden and the Democratic Party, the statement said. Tehran's motivation to conduct such activities is in part driven by a perception that President Trump's re-election would result in a continuation of U.S. pressure on Iran in an effort to foment a regime change, Evanina said. So that's interesting. I thought I'd bring it up, particularly for my American friends as we get closer to the election. I think, we're just around 3 months, a little less than 3 months, somewhere like that, to the next election. So I think it's important that folks, seek their information about the election from trustworthy news sources rather than Twitter and Facebook. Those seem to be historically primarily how these national agents have been trying to meddle in the election, especially I think on Facebook, because Facebook doesn't seem to give two hoots about what they allow on their platform. And that's one reason why I don't have a Facebook account. Can't stand Zuckerberg. But there you have it, folks. This election is going to be interesting. The polls are showing that Biden should win. However, I wouldn't count Donald Trump out necessarily. I think his base is quite rabid, and he might pull out something soon to help bring more voters to the table. Very interesting article here from Time. The next global depression is coming, and optimism won't slow it down. So now we're starting to see major news agencies or news producers, publishers, start thinking that this is a global depression, and I would have to agree. This article is from Ian Bremmer, foreign affairs columnist and editor-at-large at the time. COVID-19 infections are on the rise across the US and around the world, even in countries that once thought they had contained the virus. Unemployment numbers remain dizzyingly high, even as the US stock market continues to defy gravity. We're headed into a global depression, a period of economic misery that few living people have experienced. Today, the US and most of the world have a sturdy middle class. We have social safety nets that didn't exist 9 decades ago, and arguably that will help perhaps temper the real tragedies that a global depression could potentially deliver. So hopefully that'll help manage some of the pain that we'll experience. But those expecting a so-called V-shaped economic recovery are going to be disappointed. Let's start with the word depression. There is no commonly accepted definition of the term. However, there are 3 factors that separate a true economic depression from a mere recession. First, the impact is global. Check mark. Second, it cuts deeper into livelihoods than any recession we faced in our lifetimes. Another check mark. Third, its bad effects will linger longer. Absolutely. A depression is not a period of uninterrupted economic contraction. There can be periods of temporary progress within it that create the appearance of recovery. The Great Depression of the 1930s began with the stock market crash of October 1929 and continued into the early 1940s when World War II created the basis for new growth. That period included two separate economic drops, first from 1929 to 1933 and then again from 1937 into 1938. So that's a long time, that's almost 10 years. I don't think we will be in for a depression this long, but I think certainly between 3 to 5 years before we come back to 2019 levels, in my opinion. Depressions don't just generate ugly stats and send buyers and sellers into hibernation, they change the way we live. Some elected leaders around the world now speak more often about wealth inequality, but few have done much to address it. And of course, that's an ongoing issue and that has to be addressed. Otherwise, not only will we have greater wealth inequality, we'll have more rioting and protesting, I'm certain. COVID-19 fears will bring lasting changes to public attitudes toward all activities that involve crowds of people and how we work on a daily basis. It will also permanently change America's competitive position in the world and raise profound uncertainty about US-China relations going forward. That's for certain. And of course, I've already noticed that my own public attitude towards activities involving crowds of people has changed. I'm certainly not interested in being in indoor places where there's a lot of people gathered. So for example, cinemas, movie theaters are off the table for me, probably so are theaters, music venues, things of that nature. Even going to the mall, I'm doing that discreetly and when only I need to, rather than just going there just to walk around or just to have a look-see. Nowadays I'm a bit more focused in where I go and when I go. And here's a chart of the percent job losses in recessions of the 20th and 21st century. So we're already mirroring to some degree the Great Depression from 1929. You can see how long that took. I think this is days, perhaps? No, this must be weeks or months, I'm assuming. It doesn't say here, but that's got to be months, I'm assuming. I would think, 120s, that's almost, that was over 10 years, I guess, or almost 10 years. Nevertheless, it's just a long time, and here we are, we're barely having started into the depression. Now look at that huge V-shaped recovery, but what's going to happen? We've seen this here before. We've seen it here before. We've seen this here before, and then it crashes down again. Up here again, down a bit. I mean, these are catastrophic numbers. And our numbers are probably, if we were counting them the way they were back then, our numbers would probably be mirroring much more deeply like this is, I'm certain. Nevertheless, we're going up, and we're probably going to have maybe something like this. Maybe we'll get out about there. In addition, political dysfunction in the US and around the world is more severe than in 2008-2009. That's right, most of the countries in the world, the leaders are not perhaps handling this crisis as they could have or as best as they could have. First, the current slowdown is without a doubt global, so we're going through those three reasons as he talked about up here. As he talks about the three factors, so the first impact is global, and we've seen that especially. Then second, the economic impact of COVID-19 will cut deeper than any recession in living memory. And we've already seen that so far. The Federal Reserve noted that the severity, scope, and speed of the ensuing downturn in economic activity have been significantly worse than any recession since World War II. Signs of corporate economic distress are mounting, and second and third waves of coronavirus infections could throw many more people out of work. Recovery will come by fits and starts. Leaving aside the unique problem of measuring the unemployment rate during a once-in-a-century pandemic, there is more important warning sign here. And of course, those numbers, as I believe, are being massaged or manipulated to some degree, not showing the true picture of how the unemployment disaster is actually unfolding. The share of job losses classified as temporary fell from 88.6% in April and May to 78.6% in June. That's a 10% drop. A larger percentage of the workers stuck in that still historically high unemployment rate won't have jobs to return to, that's for certain. And then third, the unemployment rate will remain stubbornly high for the next decade, and economic output will remain depressed for years. So that's interesting. And this is talking about the jagged swoosh recovery. This is the recovery that this author is potentially seeing. And so we've had a small blip up here. So perhaps we're already in the jagged swoosh recovery. And as you can see, it takes a while to get back to where it was. Both supply and demand have sustained sudden and deep damage, and it will become progressively harder politically to impose second and third lockdowns. That's why the shape of economic recovery will be kind of ugly, jagged swoosh, as he suggests. What could world leaders do to shorten this global depression? They could resist the urge to tell their people that brighter days are just around the corner. People need leaders to take responsibility for tough decisions. Today's lack of international leadership makes matters worse, and that is certain. I think the way that America in particular has handled this is endemic of this lack of leadership, as you've seen, and this lack of consistency from the Trump White House, of course. And now you see that this is causing great consequences, great hardships for many people, and of course the numbers of the infections just keep rising and rising. So this is going to take a long time to unwind. It's still in the first wave. Second wave, I think, is expected this fall. And we'll probably be coming into the second wave as we're still trying to get a handle on this first wave. So really things are not going to improve much before, I think, next spring or summer, in my opinion, at least as far as the virus is concerned. And of course, the effects on the economy will take years perhaps to fully recover from. Coronavirus stimulus talks fall apart in disappointing meeting between Democrats and White House. Another disappointing meeting between Democrats and the White House on coronavirus aid yielded little progress. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin and White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows said they will recommend Trump take executive action on unemployment insurance, an eviction moratorium, and student loan assistance. It is unclear when talks will restart on coronavirus aid legislation, as Pelosi said she will tell the White House to return when it increases the price tag of its relief offer. In the $2 trillion gap between the two sides, the Republicans are offering a $1 trillion stimulus package. The Democrats want $3 trillion, and I think they came back with a $2 trillion package, which the Republicans turned their nose up at. Because Congress controls federal spending, it is unclear what power Trump has to extend those programs as part of an executive order. So we'll see what happens there. In other words, this thing is going to roll on for weeks yet before probably they get anything done, I imagine. Meanwhile, these folks, these clowns, are playing fast and loose with everyone's livelihoods. I mean, literally lives on the line here. As people become more financially insecure, increases of all sorts of nasty outcomes happen. So we see more domestic violence, we see more suicides, we see more stress, we see more drug and alcohol abuse. It's a very bad situation that we're in. These folks are playing theater with our lives as puppet masters. Mnuchin indicated he would not come to the table again unless Democrats changed their tune on pandemic relief. So House Democrats passed a roughly $3 trillion relief package, and Republicans last week proposed a bill that costs about $1 trillion. Schumer has said Democrats would not accept legislation that puts less than $2 trillion into the pandemic response. I mean, I think that seems reasonable and fair. You meet halfway between 1 and 3 is 2. Trump said he had no interest in Democrats' request for nearly $1 trillion in state and local relief. I don't know why this is such a big deal. I don't think it's only going to Democratic states and counties and cities. And in fact, of course, cities are hurting exceptionally. My city here in Canada has seen a decline in tax revenues. So, I mean, of course, states and cities need help. So here's what Pelosi outlined as several areas of disagreement. Democrats aim to put $75 billion into COVID-19 testing and treatment. GOP only includes $15 billion. GOP has offered $150 billion for states and municipalities, and the Democrats want $915 billion. A couple $100 billion apart on money to help schools. They want more money for food, water, and utility assistance. And Democrats want to secure more concessions on ensuring a complete consensus and safe voting during the pandemic. So, I mean, there's some negotiation can be done here, but they've got to get things going here, honestly. Schumer indicated an order could get held up in court because what they're talking about here is Trump is going to do these executive orders to try and prolong the eviction moratoriums, etc., etc. But now, of course, the Democrats are threatening to sue that power, that executive order power. So really, I mean, everyone is acting like children, in my opinion, instead of just meeting in the middle to actually try and get some help to people who are hurting. And of course, none of these guys, none of the congressmen, from the House or the Senate are hurting at all. They've got fat salaries, and most of them are well-to-do in any event, of course, because of all that money that comes in from the corporate masters. Inequality has never been bigger. Financial assets hit a record 620% of GDP. It just shows you some more of the nonsense that's happening on Wall Street. As of August 2019, Wall Street, U.S. private sector financial assets was 5.5 times the size of Main Street, the U.S. GDP. Between 1950 and 2000, the norm was between 2.5 and 3.5 times. The value of US financial assets, Wall Street, now hitting an all-time high of 6.2 times the size of GDP. You can see it here in the chart. I mean, if that's not parabolic, I don't know what is. If that's not a bubble, I don't know what is. Of course, as we've seen before, the top 5 stocks of the S&P as percent of market cap is over 23%. Here they're talking about 23%. We've never had it this high ever, I don't believe. In addition, banks won't lend. 71% of loan officers reported tighter bank lending standards in quarter 2. I think that's this chart here. I mean, this is practically getting up to where it was at the financial crisis. I'm sure we'll probably see that again. And here's state and local governments showing that they need certainly help. Of course, here the US, 29%. This is probably tax inflows. California seen minus 42%. Here's the information down here. State and local governments can't spend. State tax revenues down 37% year on year in New York and down 42% in California, down 53% in Oregon. So really, really bad shape. US federal budget deficit at 25% of GDP if phase 4 fiscal stimulus is greater than 1 trillion. And that's the highest since 1943. World War II peak of 27.5%, which we'll probably get to, I imagine. The dollar reserve status is on borrowed time due to a tsunami of printing and debasing. And then what does all of this mean for markets? 3 things. The summer dip Hartnett expected may not be coming after all, but 2020 will be the big top. And while 2020 is the mega bull unleashed by central banks, 2021 will be the bear, so he thinks. Interesting. We'll see what happens. Now on to cryptocurrency. Raoul Pal, it may not be worth owning any asset other than Bitcoin. Raoul Pal, CEO and founder of Real Vision, says Bitcoin may soon become his only asset for long-term investments. The former Goldman Sachs fund manager stated that although many investors choose gold as an alternative to fiat, Bitcoin has been the only asset in the world to offset the growth of the G4 balance sheet. And here he gives you a chart which makes no sense to me, but perhaps you can understand this. I don't know if this is the central bank balance sheet divided by Bitcoin at 2.6, whatever that means to me, or if this is central bank balance sheet in gold, but it's not kind of green or bluish there, so I don't know what this is. But anyway, it's interesting to see that other people are starting to see the bullish case for cryptocurrency. Now, Raoul Pal has been a fan of Bitcoin for some time. I don't know how long, but for some time. So this shouldn't necessarily be a surprise. Pal told Cointelegraph in May that the devaluation of world currencies will cause the price of Bitcoin to rise 50 to 100 times in the next 5 years. He interpreted economic cycle theory charts to mean the cryptocurrency could eventually reach $1 million. And of course, that's the first time we heard that. And that's what I'm expecting. I'm expecting Bitcoin to see $1 million by the end of the decade. So we'll see what happens. I mean, the future is unknown and it's unknowable, but we have to put in our best guesses. Otherwise, we can't plan for the future. And of course, oftentimes we'll be wrong, oftentimes we'll be right. And now let's check out the cryptocurrencies in aggregate. Okay, market cap of 363 billion, up a little bit, 1.1%. Coins at 58.53. I can't remember if that's down or up from yesterday's number, but it's down from the 7,700 odd we saw earlier. Okay, so mostly green across the board here in the last 24 hours. Bitcoin, Ethereum up, doing better than Bitcoin. XRP down. Bitcoin Cash down as well. Chainlink, a very strong coin currently. Stellar down a bit still. Monero, privacy coin, holding its own. So not a lot of big movements, but except down here, Aave, 10%. And of course, what else was up there at 9%? Chainlink almost up at 10%. Okay, on to the online oracle for today's most pressing question. Okay, so we just heard from Raoul Pal, who believes that Bitcoin will hit $1 million potentially by within 5 years. So I thought I would ask the online oracle, will Bitcoin reach $1 million per coin by the end of 2025? Now, I think that's possible. I think it's aggressive. But let's see what the Bitcoin has to say. Excuse me, the online oracle. Oh, it is certain. Okay, well, the 8-ball economist has not often been that certain about anything. But apparently it's certain that Bitcoin will reach $1 million by the end of 2025. As you know, I'm investing currently only in cryptocurrencies, primarily Bitcoin, my biggest cryptocurrency I own right now, the biggest share of my savings in cryptocurrencies. As you know, I'm a precious metal fan as well, but I find that silver has run up a bit, so I'm not chasing. And of course, Bitcoin and the rest of the cryptocurrencies doing well, but they aren't going parabolic yet. So at that point, I'll probably put on the brakes a bit and wait for pullbacks. But so far, my money is going into cryptocurrency. And also, I'm doing a little bit of trading on options, some debit spreads. We'll look at that tomorrow. I've done a couple this past week. I'll just show you those. And then as I close them, we'll look at how they've done. So thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate you. Hope you have a wonderful day out there. Enjoy your weekend. Stay healthy and kind and compassionate. Put away some savings, pay down some debt, and we'll get through this, even if it takes a few years. And above all else, remember, dum spiro, spero.